It started with a scuffed brown purse sitting beside my chair at the country club ballroom, but that purse changed everything. Snow drifted softly outside the tall windows of Ashford Hills Country Club while waiters carried silver trays between tables glowing under crystal chandeliers. Everywhere I looked there were polished shoes, expensive dresses, and women laughing too loudly over glasses of champagne. I stood near the coat check smoothing the sleeve of my dark navy wool dress when Caroline finally spotted me across the lobby. Her smile appeared instantly, but it never quite reached her eyes. "Eleanor," she said while kissing the air beside my cheek. "You made it." Her gaze dropped almost immediately toward the old leather purse hanging from my wrist. I noticed the tiny pause before she smiled again. "You still carry that thing?" she asked lightly. "I guess vintage is coming back now." Two women beside her laughed politely, although one looked uncomfortable afterward. I simply rested my hand over the worn brass clasp. "It still works," I answered. Caroline exhaled through her nose softly before adjusting the diamond bracelet on her wrist. "Well, tonight is a donor event. Most people here are pretty image conscious." She said it quietly enough to sound helpful, but not quietly enough to hide the embarrassment underneath. Across the ballroom a jazz trio played old holiday standards while enormous black and white photographs of early Whitmore development projects rotated across projection screens near the stage. I stopped walking for a moment when one photograph appeared showing a much younger version of my late husband standing beside an unfinished apartment complex in Hartford sometime around 1978. My fingers tightened slightly around the purse strap without thinking. "You okay?" my son Daniel asked as he approached carrying two champagne glasses. There was genuine concern in his voice, but also distraction. He looked exhausted already and the fundraiser had barely started. "I am fine," I said. Then an older man near the registration table glanced toward my purse and suddenly froze mid-conversation. His expression changed so quickly it unsettled me. "That cannot be possible," I heard him whisper under his breath. The older man near the registration table kept staring at my purse long after everyone else had moved on. He looked to be somewhere in his 70s with silver hair combed neatly back and a dark tuxedo that fit him like he had worn it for 20 years. I recognized him vaguely from another lifetime, although I could not immediately place where. Caroline touched my elbow lightly before guiding me toward the ballroom entrance. "Come on," she said with a smile tight enough to crack. "You can sit near the auction tables for now. Most of the board members are up front tonight." I nodded once. "Wherever you need me." Daniel glanced between us as though he sensed something uncomfortable settling beneath the surface already. "Mom, I will check on you in a little while," he said quietly before another donor intercepted him near the stage. The ballroom slowly filled with soft jazz music and overlapping conversations about real estate taxes, charity expansions, and winter travel plans. A woman beside me admired Caroline's diamond earrings while another complimented the floral arrangements flown in from New York that morning. I listened politely without saying much. Years ago I had attended events like this beside my husband before the company became polished enough to hire public relations teams and event planners. Back then donors ate chicken salad on folding chairs inside unfinished office buildings. Funny how quickly people forget humble beginnings once marble floors appear beneath their shoes. A young server stopped beside my chair carrying champagne and glanced toward my purse. "That leather is beautiful," she said sincerely. "They do not make clasps like that anymore." Before I could answer, the older man from the registration table suddenly approached us holding a program booklet tightly in one hand. Up close his face looked pale, almost unsettled. "Excuse me," he said carefully. "Would you mind telling me where you got that purse?" Caroline appeared again before I could respond. "Trust me, Harold," she said lightly. "It is just an old thrift store bag Eleanor refuses to throw away." Harold did not laugh. His eyes stayed fixed on the worn brass clasp near my wrist. Then he lowered his voice enough that only I could hear him. "Mrs. Whitmore," he whispered, "that crest on your purse should not even exist anymore." Harold's words stayed with me long after he walked away toward the donor tables. The ballroom suddenly felt warmer than before, almost crowded with too many voices and too much perfume drifting beneath the chandeliers. I lowered my eyes toward the worn brass clasp on my purse. The tiny engraved crest had faded badly over the years, but under the lights I could still make out the faint outline of a lion wrapped around a key. My husband used to trace that same symbol absent-mindedly during long business calls at our kitchen table decades ago. "You look pale," Caroline said as she returned carrying 2 auction catalogs. "Are you all right?" I nodded once. "Just tired." She studied me for another second before leaning closer. "Harold Bennett can be odd sometimes. He gets sentimental about old company history." Her tone stayed casual, but I noticed how quickly she glanced toward my purse afterward. Across the ballroom, Daniel stepped onto the stage beside a large projection screen displaying plans for the Whitmore Family Housing Initiative. Guests applauded politely while servers dimmed the lights around the room. "Tonight is about legacy," Daniel began. "About honoring the people who built this company and using that success to give back." Something inside me tightened unexpectedly at those words. Beside the stage, another photograph appeared showing Daniel's father shaking hands outside the company's first office building sometime in the late 70s. Most people in the room probably saw ambition in that picture. I remembered exhaustion. I remembered overdue mortgage notices hidden in kitchen drawers and my husband coming home after midnight too worried to eat dinner. "Beautiful speech," a woman beside me whispered. "Your son has done incredible things with the Whitmore name." I smiled politely without correcting her timeline. Suddenly Harold reappeared near my chair carrying a glass of bourbon with noticeably unsteady hands. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something before tonight goes any further." Caroline turned immediately. "Harold, this is not really the time." But he ignored her completely. His eyes stayed fixed on the purse resting against my lap. "Did Charles Whitmore give that bag to you before the Hartford collapse?" The room noise around me seemed to disappear all at once because nobody outside the original company circle ever mentioned the Hartford collapse anymore. Nobody except the people who knew what was buried underneath it. Caroline's expression tightened the moment Harold mentioned the Hartford collapse. Even in the dim ballroom lighting I could see the shift behind her polished smile. Most people here are probably more interested in the silent auction than ancient company history, she said lightly while adjusting the stack of donor envelopes in her arms. Harold barely acknowledged her. That collapse nearly buried Whitmore Development, he said quietly to me. Half the original investors disappeared after it happened. Nearby applause broke out as Daniel finished his speech on stage, but the sound felt distant now, almost muffled beneath the growing tension around our table. I rested my hand calmly over the purse in my lap. The leather felt softer than it used to after all these years. A lot of things disappeared back then, I answered. Harold studied me carefully for another moment before lowering his voice further. Charles carried documents inside a bag exactly like that during the emergency meetings in Hartford. Caroline gave a short, uneasy laugh. Well, I am sure there were many old bags in the 70s. Harold finally looked directly at her. No. There were not. Something in his tone made her fall silent immediately. Across the ballroom, guests moved toward the dessert tables while servers refreshed champagne glasses under the warm chandelier light. The atmosphere still looked elegant from a distance, but underneath it I could feel small currents of discomfort moving quietly through the room now. Daniel stepped down from the stage and approached us looking concerned. Everything all right over here? He asked. Caroline answered too quickly. Of course. Harold ignored her again. Daniel, he said carefully, did your father ever talk to you about the Hartford refinancing meetings? Daniel frowned. Not really. Dad hated talking about that period. Harold nodded slowly while staring toward my purse once more. There is a reason for that. My chest tightened slightly at the way he said it. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Just tired. Like a man carrying a memory too long. Then one of the servers accidentally brushed against my chair while passing through the crowded ballroom. My purse slipped from my lap and hit the marble floor harder than I expected. The brass clasp snapped open instantly. Papers slid across the floor beneath the chandelier light, and Harold's face lost all color the second he saw the signatures printed across the top page. The ballroom noise faded almost instantly after the papers scattered across the marble floor. One page slid beneath a nearby cocktail table while another stopped directly beside Caroline's heels. I bent slowly to pick them up, but Harold reached the closest document first. The moment he saw the signature at the bottom, his breathing changed. My God, he whispered. Daniel stepped closer. What is it? Harold looked from the paper to me with visible disbelief. This is the original Hartford stabilization agreement. Several nearby guests turned toward us now, sensing something serious beneath the awkward silence. Caroline forced a small laugh. Okay, somebody needs to explain why everyone suddenly looks like they saw a ghost. Harold ignored her completely. His hands trembled slightly as he held up the document beneath the chandelier light. Whitmore Development did not survive the Hartford collapse because of Charles Whitmore, he said quietly. It survived because of Eleanor. Daniel stared at him blankly. What are you talking about? I closed my eyes briefly before answering myself. Your father ran out of financing in 1981. The memory still carried weight even now. The banks refused another extension after the market crash. Around us the ballroom had gone almost completely still except for the faint sound of piano music continuing near the stage. Harold carefully unfolded another document from the floor. "These are collateral transfer records," he explained. Eleanor liquidated her own inheritance and personally guaranteed the emergency refinancing package. Daniel looked stunned. "Mom," I kept my voice calm. "Your father asked me not to tell anyone. He said people trusted strong men more than women carrying family money." Caroline folded her arms tightly across her chest, but I noticed uncertainty replacing confidence in her expression now. "Wait," she said carefully. "You are saying the entire company was rebuilt using her assets?" Harold nodded once. "Including the first Hartford properties that eventually became Whitmore Holdings." Daniel sank slowly into the nearest chair like his knees no longer trusted him. I reached for the remaining papers scattered beside my purse, including one sealed envelope yellowed badly with age. The handwriting across the front belonged to my husband. Daniel noticed it immediately. "Mom," he asked quietly, "why does that envelope have my father's signature and the words open only if the family forgets written across the front?" Nobody in the ballroom seemed interested in the silent auction anymore. Conversations had collapsed into uneasy whispers while guests pretended not to stare at the papers spread across the marble floor near my chair. Daniel kept looking between me and the envelope in his hands like he no longer recognized either one. Caroline remained perfectly still beside the donor table, although I could see tension building beneath her controlled expression. "Why would Charles write something like this?" Daniel asked quietly while holding the sealed envelope. I looked toward the stage where the Whitmore family logo still glowed across the projection screen above rows of untouched champagne glasses. "Because your father worried success would eventually make this family forget how fragile everything once was," I answered. Harold slowly removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Your mother carried this company through the recession when investors abandoned it," he said to Daniel. "Most people in this room would not even be sitting here tonight without her." Caroline finally spoke again, though her voice sounded smaller now. "Why hide all of it?" I could hear genuine confusion beneath the defensiveness this time. "People would have respected you." A faint smile crossed my face, though it carried more sadness than satisfaction. Back then women were often thanked privately and erased publicly. Daniel lowered his eyes immediately after hearing that. Nearby, one of the board members quietly asked another guest if the Hartford records had ever been disclosed during the company restructuring years earlier. The answer apparently was no, because both men suddenly looked alarmed. Caroline noticed it too. Her posture changed almost instantly. "Wait," she said while turning toward Daniel. "If these records were never disclosed during the merger filings," Harold answered before she finished, "then certain ownership protections may still legally exist under Eleanor's original collateral agreement." The words seemed to hit Caroline harder than anything else that night. Not because of greed exactly, but because she suddenly understood how unstable the polished world around her might actually be. Daniel carefully turned the envelope over in his hands again. "Mom," he asked softly, "did Dad want me to read this tonight?" Before I could answer, a woman from the charity board approached our table looking visibly shaken. "Daniel," she whispered urgently, "the trustees are asking to speak with you privately. Right now." Daniel disappeared with the trustees into a private conference room overlooking the golf course, while the ballroom slowly filled again with careful conversations pretending nothing unusual had happened. But people kept glancing toward me. Toward the purse resting quietly beside my chair. Toward Harold standing nearby with the stunned expression of a man watching old history crawl back into daylight. Caroline remained at the table twisting her wedding ring slowly around her finger. For the first time that evening she looked less polished than tired. "Did Daniel really not know any of this?" she asked finally. "No," I answered honestly. "Your father-in-law wanted him to inherit confidence, not fear." She gave a faint humorless laugh. "Well, I think tonight ruined both." The jazz trio near the stage started another holiday standard while servers quietly cleared untouched dessert plates around the room. Everything still looked elegant from a distance, but the atmosphere had changed completely now. Like everyone sensed something larger moving beneath the surface. Caroline lowered her voice. "You could have told us." I looked at her carefully before answering. "Would it have mattered?" She opened her mouth quickly, then stopped because neither of us trusted the easy answer anymore. Across the ballroom, Daniel finally emerged from the conference room carrying the sealed envelope in one hand and several legal folders in the other. His face looked older somehow. One of the trustees followed closely behind him, whispering urgently, while another avoided eye contact entirely. Harold stepped toward them immediately. "Well?" Daniel exhaled slowly before speaking. "The collateral agreement was never dissolved after the Hartford recovery." Caroline stared at him. "What does that mean exactly?" Daniel looked directly at me first before answering her. "It means my mother still holds protected controlling interest rights connected to the original company restructuring." The silence afterward felt heavier than any argument could have. Nearby, someone accidentally dropped a champagne glass and the sharp sound echoed across the ballroom. Caroline blinked twice, like her mind was still catching up to the words. "Controlling interest," she repeated softly. Daniel nodded once. "Legally speaking," he paused while tightening his grip on the envelope. "None of us actually understood who this company belonged to." Then he slowly held out the sealed letter toward me. "Mom," he said quietly in front of everyone watching now, "I think it is finally time to open this." The envelope paper felt fragile between my fingers, as though it had been waiting decades for this exact moment. Around us, the ballroom remained unnaturally quiet except for the faint clink of silverware being cleared in the distance. Daniel stood beside me with visible tension in his shoulders, while Caroline remained motionless near the donor table, staring at the legal folders spread across the marble surface. I carefully opened the seal and unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting belonged unmistakably to my husband. Even after all these years, I recognized the uneven pressure of his pen strokes immediately. My throat tightened before I even reached the second sentence. "If this letter is being opened," I read softly, "then somewhere along the way our family forgot who carried them through the hardest years." Daniel lowered his eyes instantly. Across the ballroom, several trustees quietly stepped away, pretending to give privacy while still listening closely. Eleanor gave everything she inherited to save this company after I failed to protect it myself, the letter continued. Every building carrying the Whitmore name stands because she sacrificed comfort, reputation, and security without asking for recognition. Caroline pressed her lips together tightly. Earlier that evening she had looked perfectly composed greeting donors beside the ballroom entrance. Now she seemed smaller, somehow stripped of the certainty she usually carried so effortlessly. Charles instructed us never to disclose the collateral protections publicly unless necessary, Harold explained quietly. He feared investors would question female ownership control during that era. Daniel looked physically shaken now. Dad let everyone believe he rebuilt the company alone. I folded the letter slowly. Your father believed protecting the company mattered more than correcting the story. Caroline finally stepped closer toward me. Her voice came softer this time, almost uncertain. And all these years, you just carried those documents in that purse? I glanced down at the worn leather beside my chair. Your father called it the safest place in the world because nobody important ever looks twice at ordinary things. The sentence seemed to hit her harder than the legal documents themselves. Nearby, two board members quietly informed Daniel that emergency meetings would need to happen before market open Monday morning. The company structure they thought they understood no longer existed the way they believed. Daniel looked toward me again with something deeper than guilt now. Respect. Then Caroline suddenly whispered the one question nobody else had dared ask all night. Eleanor, what happens next? Snow had started falling harder by the time the fundraiser finally ended. Most of the guests left quietly, avoiding unnecessary conversations on their way through the country club lobby while staff folded linens and extinguished candles around the ballroom. The giant projection screen carrying the Whitmore name had already gone dark. I slipped the documents carefully back into my purse, one piece at a time, while Daniel stood nearby watching me with the same expression he used to wear as a little boy after realizing he had broken something important. Mom, he said softly, I do not even know what to say. I looked up at him for a moment before fastening the brass clasp shut again. You do not always need perfect words, I answered. Sometimes people just need to see clearly. Caroline remained near the windows overlooking the snowy golf course. Her posture had lost the polished confidence she carried earlier that evening. When she finally walked toward me, there was no performance left in her voice anymore. I am sorry, she said quietly. Not because of the company. Because I made assumptions about you long before tonight. I studied her face carefully, and for the first time all evening I saw something honest there. Not humiliation. Not fear. Just someone realizing how easily appearances can distort the truth about another person. Daniel helped me into my winter coat while the last of the ballroom music faded into silence around us. As we walked toward the parking lot together, Harold stopped beside me one final time. Charles knew exactly what he was doing when he trusted you with those papers, he said gently. I smiled faintly. No. Charles trusted me long before there were papers. Outside, the cold Connecticut air carried the smell of snow and pine trees across the empty parking lot. Daniel reached for my purse before I could open the car door myself. He held it carefully this time, almost reverently. Funny how something people mocked an hour earlier suddenly looked valuable once they understood the story it carried. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more emotional family stories filled with quiet strength, truth, and unforgettable moments. And if you have ever been underestimated because of appearances, share your thoughts below, because sometimes the strongest people are the ones nobody notices at first.